Section 1. The town that time forgot. There is a town in America that does not exist on any map. It has a nuclear power plant and a harbor and a tire fire that has been burning for so long that nobody alive can remember when it started. It has a gorge, and a monorail, and a butte, and a prison, and an elementary school that has somehow survived multiple disasters, budget collapses, and at least one complete structural failure. It has mountains nearby if the episode needs mountains. It has an ocean if the story calls for an ocean. It sits in the north and the south and the Midwest and the coastal heartland all at once, depending on which week you tune in. The town is called Springfield, and Springfield is home to one of the most scrutinized, most theorized, most deeply examined fictional families in the history of human storytelling. You already know them: Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie. The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December, 1989. That means the show has now been on the air for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes, the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television. Those are not comparative achievements. Those are records that may never be broken, because no other show has ever managed to do what The Simpsons has done, which is remain culturally relevant across 4 decades of seismic change in how Americans live, what they watch, and what they believe about themselves and the world around them. And in all that time, across every single one of those episodes, nobody in Springfield has aged a single day. Let that settle for a moment, because it is genuinely strange when you sit with it. Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. He was 10 in 1989. He is 10 right now. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still 1. Homer and Marge are still somewhere in their mid-30s, still married, still living in the same yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, still parking in the same driveway, still eating dinner at the same table. The world outside Springfield has changed beyond recognition. The Berlin Wall came down. The internet was born and transformed everything. Smartphones arrived. Streaming arrived. The entire architecture of daily American life was rebuilt from the ground up at least twice over. And Springfield remained perfectly, impossibly, eternally still. This is what the television industry calls a floating timeline. The idea is simple enough on the surface. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When an episode aired in 1998, the characters were living in 1998. The references change. The technology changes. The cultural backdrop shifts with the times. But the characters never accumulate the weight of those passing years. They exist in a kind of suspended animation, locked at whatever age they were when the cameras first found them, moving through decade after decade without a single new wrinkle, without a single birthday candle added to the cake. Most people accept this without question. It is, as the saying goes, just how animated shows work. You do not watch the Flintstones and wonder why Pebbles never went to college. You do not watch old Scooby-Doo reruns and ask when Fred and Daphne finally got married. Cartoons are cartoons. The characters are illustrations. The rules of time that govern real human lives do not apply in the same way when the people in question are drawn rather than photographed. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that this explanation has started to crack at the edges, because the floating timeline has produced contradictions so massive, so strange, so impossible to ignore if you are paying attention, that the show's own fictional reality has begun to fold in on itself in ways that go far beyond normal cartoon logic. Homer and Marge's backstory, for instance, has been rewritten at least 4 times. In early seasons, their courtship was set in the late 1970s and early 1980s, complete with era-appropriate music and fashion and cultural touchstones. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, the backstory had to follow. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they could not have met in 1980. So the show quietly moved their high school years forward, first into the 1990s, then into the 2000s. Their origin story has been told in fundamentally different versions in different episodes, each one anchored to a different decade, each one contradicting the others. Their memories are not fixed. Their past is a draft that keeps being revised to fit the current moment, and the current moment never stops moving. This is one of the first things you notice when you start really looking at Springfield. The town holds together on the surface. The animation is consistent. The character designs are consistent. The house looks the same, the school looks the same, Moe's Tavern looks the same, but underneath that surface consistency, the actual fabric of Springfield's history keeps shifting, rewriting, dissolving, and reforming in ways that should alarm anyone who looks too closely. Events that would permanently alter any real community happen and are forgotten by the following week. Characters die and return without explanation. Storylines of enormous emotional consequence are introduced and then quietly abandoned, never referenced again, as if the show made a choice and then immediately decided not to acknowledge that it had made it. Some people call this lazy writing, and there are certainly moments across 36 seasons where that is the accurate diagnosis. No production running for 4 decades gets every story right, and The Simpsons has had plenty of episodes that are best explained by deadline pressure and creative exhaustion rather than anything more deliberate. But here is where the conversation gets genuinely interesting, because when you step back and look at the full sweep of the show, when you stop treating each episode as a discrete piece of entertainment and start looking at Springfield as a single, continuous place with its own internal logic and its own accumulated history, you start to find something that does not look like laziness at all. You find patterns. You find buried storylines that were introduced with apparent intention and then dropped in ways that feel almost strategic. You find details that the show returns to again and again across years and decades, each time adding another small layer to a picture that is far more coherent than the surface chaos suggests. You find, if you are willing to look at it this way, a town with secrets. Not the kind of secrets that any small American community accumulates over generations, the scandals and the buried histories and the things everyone knows but nobody says out loud. Those are there too. Springfield has plenty of those. But something deeper, something structural, something that might explain, if you follow the threads far enough, why nobody ages, why catastrophes get forgotten, why the same family keeps surviving things that should destroy them, why the man who owns the power plant has been alive since before the Spanish-American War, and why a town that has been contaminated, domed, invaded, partially destroyed, and subjected to at least 3 near-nuclear disasters still looks exactly the same every Sunday night when the opening credits roll. The theories that attempt to explain Springfield are, at this point, numerous enough to fill their own library. Some of them are simple. Some of them are elaborate to a degree that requires genuine admiration for the dedication of the people who constructed them. Some of them have been acknowledged by the show's own writers, either directly or through the kind of winking, half-confirmed oblique reference that The Simpsons has always favored when it wants to have a conversation with its most attentive viewers without fully committing to an answer. But the most interesting thing about the best Springfield theories is not that they explain 1 or 2 of the show's mysteries. It is that the very best ones explain all of them. They take the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the ageless children and the immortal billionaire and the forgotten catastrophes and the floating geography and the town that collectively chooses to forget, and they weave all of it into a single coherent picture of a place that is, underneath the jokes and the couch gags and the guest appearances, something genuinely, quietly disturbing. That is what we are going to spend the next several hours exploring, not in a rushed, clip-by-clip breakdown kind of way. More like settling in beside someone who has spent a long time thinking about this and wants to walk you through it slowly, carefully, letting each piece land before moving to the next one. The kind of conversation you have late at night when the house is quiet and the world outside has gone still and there is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to do except listen. Springfield will still be there in the morning. It always is. But tonight, let's go a little deeper than we usually do. Let's ask the questions that the residents of Springfield cannot ask, because something in the water and the air and the invisible particles drifting from those cracked cooling towers has made sure they never will. Let's figure out what is actually wrong with Springfield. There is a theory that tries to explain everything about Springfield in a single sentence. Not one of the smaller theories, the ones that account for a specific episode's strange continuity or explain a particular character's behavior in a way the show never quite commits to. The big one. The one that, once you follow it through all the way to its conclusion, makes an uncomfortable amount of sense. Before we get there, it is worth spending a few more minutes with the town itself, because Springfield rewards patience. It rewards the kind of slow attention you give something at the end of a long day when you have nowhere else to be and nothing else requiring you. There is something that you notice when you settle into the show's rhythms over time. Something that is easy to miss when you are watching casually, but becomes harder to ignore the more hours you spend in it. Springfield has a specific quality of light. Even in animation, even across different art directors and different seasons and different technological capacities, the show renders Springfield with a kind of amber warmth that persists, a quality of late afternoon Sunday evening light that makes the town feel permanently located at a specific time of day that nobody has ever quite been able to describe precisely, but that everyone who has watched the show recognizes immediately. It is the light of a place where you feel like you know what is around the next corner, where the Quickie Mart will be exactly where you expect it, where the bar with the bad taxidermy fish above the door is 2 blocks from the school in one direction and 2 blocks from the nuclear plant in the other. Springfield feels known. That is its most consistent quality across everything else that changes. It feels like a place you have been before, or a place you grew up near, or a place that exists in that slightly softened version of memory where everything is located correctly, but the distances between things are slightly off from how they actually were. The plant is always visible from the house on Evergreen Terrace, even though geography would suggest it should not be. The school is always exactly as far away as the story needs it to be. The gorge is always accessible when someone needs to fall into it. This quality of the familiar and the subtly wrong is not accidental. The show was built to achieve it. Groening and the writers who joined him in those early seasons were constructing something specific, a version of American suburban life that would feel recognizable to the maximum possible number of viewers, while also being distorted just enough in every direction that no single viewer could claim it was specifically theirs. Springfield is everywhere, and therefore everywhere is Springfield, and the quality of quiet unsettlement that produces is one of the show's most durable and least discussed achievements. We will start with the theory that tries to explain everything, the one that, once you hear it laid out in full, makes a strange kind of sense that you cannot entirely dismiss even after you have told yourself it is just a cartoon and none of it is real. The theory that says the residents of Springfield are not simply drawn in a certain style, not just animated characters following the visual conventions of their medium, but something specific and deliberate and unsettling. The theory that says Springfield is a contamination zone, and that the people inside it have been mutating for decades, slowly, invisibly, in ways that the show has been documenting since its very first season, hiding the evidence in plain sight behind 36 years of carefully constructed jokes. Drop a comment below letting us know what time it is where you are and what part of the world you're watching from. And if this kind of deep, slow breakdown is something you enjoy, subscribing keeps more of it coming your way. Section 2. The Nuclear Poison Theory. Let's begin with what we know for certain, because the foundation of this theory is not speculation. It is documented, canonical fact that the show has stated explicitly across dozens of episodes. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town of Springfield. And by any reasonable standard of measurement, it is one of the most comprehensively dangerous industrial facilities ever depicted in fiction. A surprise safety inspection of the plant found 342 separate violations. 342. The estimated cost to bring the facility up to regulatory compliance was $56 million. Burns, a billionaire many times over with resources that dwarf the annual budgets of small nations, refused to spend it. Not because the money was unavailable to him. It was not even a meaningful fraction of his net worth. He refused because fixing the problems would mean acknowledging they existed, and acknowledging they existed would mean someone might begin asking questions about what those problems had already done to the people living downwind of the cracked cooling towers. The violations themselves are worth dwelling on, because the show describes them in enough detail that you get a clear picture of what the power plant is actually doing to its surrounding environment. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into local waterways. Radioactive waste being deposited onto children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. Cooling towers that have been patched with chewing gum because actual repair work was deemed too expensive. Rats inside the facility that glow in the dark because of their prolonged radiation exposure, running freely through the infrastructure of a working reactor. And then there is the detail that the show drops with characteristic casualness and then never revisits. Human skeletons in the basement. Not one. Multiple. Human skeletons in the basement of an active nuclear power plant. The show reveals this, allows you a moment to absorb it, and then moves on without explanation, without follow-up, without a single character asking the obvious question about who those people were and how they came to be dead inside a facility that is still generating electricity for an entire town. In any realistic universe, that detail alone would trigger a federal investigation of staggering scope. In Springfield, it is treated as a background gag. Now, the person whose job it is to prevent all of this from happening, the person whose professional responsibility is to stand between the residents of Springfield and radioactive catastrophe, is Homer Simpson. The show's own creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. He is a man who, in one of the series' more remarkable episodes, discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood, physically obstructing his cognitive function in ways that have shaped every aspect of his adult life. He sleeps at his workstation with enough frequency that it has essentially become part of his routine. He has eaten donuts during active meltdown warnings. He once threw a donut into the reactor core, curious about whether the radiation would cause it to grow larger. That is the person standing between Springfield and nuclear disaster. And he has been standing there, failing comprehensively at that job for over 3 decades. The question the radiation theory asks is simple. What has all of this actually done to the people living in Springfield? The first visible answer appears in Season 2. Blinky. The three-eyed fish. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant and immediately becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate holds Blinky up as evidence that Burns is actively poisoning the local environment. Burns is cornered. He is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is harmless. The town watches. There is a brief moment of civic outrage, and then, with the reliable efficiency of Springfield's collective memory, the whole thing dissolves. Nobody conducts a follow-up water study. Nobody tests the soil near the plant. Nobody asks the question that should follow naturally from the discovery of a three-eyed fish in a local river. If the fish look like this, what is happening to the people drinking the same water? That question hovers over the show for decades without ever being directly addressed. But the evidence accumulates, quietly and consistently, in the background of hundreds of episodes. Look at the residents of Springfield. Look at them carefully, not as cartoon characters designed in a particular visual style, but as people inhabiting a specific geographic location with a specific industrial history. Homer has a skull shape that defies normal human anatomy. His overbite is pronounced to a degree that would require serious orthodontic intervention in the real world. His eyes bulge in a way that no standard medical explanation covers. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His body's capacity to absorb trauma that would be fatal to any normal human being is something the show documents episode after episode with the consistency of a scientific study. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen off cliffs. He has been hit by multiple vehicles. He has survived explosions at ranges that should reduce a human body to its component parts. He heals from all of it with a speed and completeness that has no biological precedent. Marge has the same 4 fingers, the same bulging eyes, the same proportions that deviate from normal human anatomy. Her hair has been growing vertically, maintaining an identical shape without any visible product or structural support for 36 years. She was briefly employed at the nuclear plant herself, exposed directly to the same facility, the same leaking infrastructure, the same ambient radiation that saturates every corner of the building. Bart and Lisa and Maggie were all born in Springfield, all raised in Springfield, all drinking the same water and breathing the same air. And every single one of them displays physical characteristics that do not appear in populations living outside Springfield's radius. The spiky hair that holds its shape without assistance. The overbites. The yellowed skin that covers every resident of the town without exception. And that last detail is the one that makes the theory click into something sharper than ordinary fan speculation. The yellow skin. When celebrities visit Springfield in the show, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. The show draws outsiders with proportions that are more naturalistic, features that sit closer to realistic human anatomy. This is usually explained as a creative choice, a deliberate visual distinction between the show's core cast and the real-world figures who pass through its universe, and that is probably part of it. But consider the other explanation. Within the logic of Springfield's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live inside the town and people who come from outside it. The people inside the contamination zone display physical characteristics that deviate from normal human biology. The people outside it look relatively normal, and the deviation is not random. It follows a pattern. Eyes that bulge, skin that yellows, fingers that number 4 rather than 5, bodies that recover from fatal trauma as though the normal rules of cellular damage do not apply. The animals mirror this. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same proportional distortions. Springfield's wildlife, as documented through Blinky and through scattered background details across the show's run, is demonstrably affected by whatever the plant is putting into the local ecosystem. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a three-eyed fish and says, clearly, this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms in Springfield's water supply. And then it expects you to accept that the exact same radiation, flowing through the exact same water, breathed in through the exact same air, has had absolutely no effect on the humans living in that environment for generations. That gap between what the show shows you and what it asks you to believe is where the radiation theory lives. Burns understands all of this. The show makes this explicit, not through one smoking gun episode but through the accumulated weight of dozens of small details spread across the series. Burns funds private medical research of a scope that goes well beyond what any normal person, even a very wealthy one, would need for personal health maintenance. He has personal physicians operating outside the normal healthcare infrastructure of Springfield. He undergoes weekly medical treatments so intensive, so loaded with experimental compounds and controlled radiation exposure, that the treatments themselves transform him physically in visible ways. This is the detail from the Springfield Files episode that the radiation theory leans on most heavily. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical regimen that keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Miss one treatment and his body begins to fail. The regimen is so extreme in its effects that after each session, Burns emerges from the facility in a dazed, euphoric state, his body emitting a faint but visible green glow. He literally illuminates the darkness of the woods around Springfield General on the nights of his treatments. The townspeople spot this glowing figure in the forest, and their collective interpretation is that they are witnessing a visitor from another planet. Not radiation exposure, not the power plant that dominates their skyline, not the facility they have been living next to for decades. An alien. That is where their minds go first. That is how thoroughly the possibility of radiation damage has been removed from their active consideration. The reason Burns understands radiation so thoroughly is that radiation is keeping him alive. He is not simply profiting from nuclear power while ignoring its effects. He is personally dependent on managing those effects within his own body. His weekly treatments are not supplemental health maintenance. They are the mechanism by which his biological systems continue to function. Without them, the diseases his body harbors, maintained in a state of carefully managed equilibrium by the treatments themselves, would surge forward and overwhelm him. Burns knows what radiation does to biological systems because radiation is the thing standing between him and death. He knows, more intimately than anyone in Springfield, what his plant has been doing to the people living downwind of it. He has been watching those effects accumulate for decades, possibly longer. He has the data. He has the research. He has the pharmaceutical infrastructure to synthesize treatments that do not exist in any standard medical context. Springfield is, in the most precise sense of the word, his laboratory. And Homer's continued employment at the facility is not, under this theory, a matter of nepotism or carelessness or the simple cartoon logic of a lovable incompetent holding down a job he should not have. It is strategy. When German investors briefly purchased the plant and immediately fired Homer, they also immediately assessed the cost of bringing the facility into regulatory compliance. The estimate nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer within the same episode. A competent safety inspector would have the plant shut down within weeks. Homer ensures the violations continue. He is not a liability Burns tolerates. He is a feature Burns relies on. The violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. The air carries whatever the cracked cooling towers release into it. And the population of Springfield, after decades of chronic low-level exposure to whatever the plant produces, is left in a state that Burns' operation depends on. Cognitively impaired enough to not connect obvious dots. Physically mutated in ways they have come to accept as simply how people look. Emotionally and intellectually blunted to a degree that makes organized resistance to the status quo essentially impossible. Consider what happens in the Simpsons movie when the contamination reaches a level that even the Environmental Protection Agency can no longer ignore. The federal government's response is to seal the entire town under a dome, a physical containment structure dropped over Springfield from above, trapping every resident inside with the pollution they have been generating. The EPA looked at Springfield and concluded that the town itself, the entire geographic area, was so fundamentally toxic that the only viable solution was to prevent it from contaminating the surrounding region. Springfield was classified, at the level of federal government, as an environmental hazard. The people inside the dome when it went up had been drinking that water and breathing that air for their entire lives. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about Springfield. It attempts to explain all of them. The characters do not age because their mutated biology has been altered at a cellular level in ways that affect normal developmental and aging processes. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's neurological function has been compromised by chronic exposure in ways that affect memory formation and retention. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to an environment that would destroy a normal human, and the adaptation that makes him nearly indestructible is the same one that has devastated his cognitive capacity. Burns maintains his existence through a medical protocol that uses controlled radiation as the active ingredient, drawing on the same nuclear infrastructure that has been slowly transforming Springfield's population for decades. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every unexplained physical characteristic that the show presents as simply how these people look, this is just their art style. This is just how they are drawn. All of it traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, feeding the same population that has been too gradually, too completely altered to understand what is happening to them, or to recognize that the town they live in is not normal, has never been normal, and may not be capable of returning to normal no matter what anyone does. The plant is not background scenery. It is not a visual shorthand for Homer's job. The radiation theory argues, with genuine rigor and a remarkable amount of canonical evidence to support it, that the Springfield nuclear power plant is the engine driving every strange thing that has ever happened in that town. It always has been, and nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they cannot. Section 3. Homer's Coma, the Dream That Never Ended. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was straightforward for the kind of story The Simpsons was telling in those years. Bart plays a series of April Fool's pranks on Homer, each one escalating from the one before it, until he reaches the point of taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker for several hours. The can, when Homer opens it, releases pressure with enough force to send him to the hospital. While Homer lies in his hospital bed, recovering from the explosion, he sees a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He leans out of the bed to reach the machine. The machine tips. It falls on him, and Homer Simpson flatlines, entering a clinically verified coma state that lasts for 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart stands at his bedside, tearfully confessing that the whole sequence was his fault. Homer, in a burst of cartoonishly immediate physical recovery, springs awake and begins strangling his son. The family laughs. Everything returns to normal. The show tells you unambiguously that Homer woke up, that the coma ended, that life on Evergreen Terrace resumed its familiar rhythms. But in the final moments of that same episode, the show reveals one more detail. During the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function, permanently, destroyed, never returning. And Homer's response to learning that he has sustained irreversible neurological damage is to laugh, despite saying, in the same breath, that he does not know why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends. The Simpsons continued for 32 more years as if none of this had happened. Unless none of it did happen, this is the premise of what fans have come to call the Homer coma theory. And it is, by any measure, the single most discussed, most internally consistent, and most emotionally resonant fan theory in the show's history. The basic argument was originally articulated on Reddit, though it has since been elaborated and refined by countless people across countless forums, comment sections, and late-night conversations. The argument is this: Homer did not wake up from his coma in April of 1993. Every episode that has aired since that date is a dream generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing what remains of his neurological function while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence begins with tone. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic in any strict sense, it was always a cartoon. But the storylines dealt with recognizable human experiences. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge faces a crisis of identity. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher who recognizes her intelligence in ways that her regular environment fails to. Bart struggles academically and faces being held back a year. These are the kinds of problems real families navigate, rendered through satire and exaggeration, but rooted in the emotional and economic texture of ordinary American life. The show's power in those early seasons came from its ability to take domestic frustration and working-class anxiety and render them both funny and genuinely moving. After the coma, the show changes. The shift is not subtle. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer discovers that his long-dead mother is actually alive and has been living underground as a fugitive radical for decades. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets God. Not once, twice. The show transforms from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety into something far more surreal, far more untethered from the kind of cause and effect logic that governs real experience. The main character holds hundreds of different jobs across the post-coma seasons. He travels to dozens of countries. He befriends celebrities at a rate that defies any plausible explanation within the show's universe. He survives physical trauma that should end him dozens of times over. The internet has been debating when The Simpsons declined in quality for 20 years. There is a genuine critical consensus that the early seasons represent something different from what the show later became, something more carefully crafted, more emotionally coherent, more concerned with the consequences of its own storylines. The coma theory offers a precise and surprisingly elegant answer to when that shift occurred and why. The Simpsons did not decline. Homer's brain got worse. The increasingly surreal, consequence-free, celebrity-saturated world of later seasons is not the result of writers losing the thread of what made the show great. It is what happens when a dreaming, slowly deteriorating brain runs out of stable material and begins filling the gaps with increasingly fragmented, wish-fulfillment-driven imagery. There is a detail that predates the coma episode and functions, under this theory, as something very close to a prophecy. 6 months before the vending machine fell, in the Season 4 premiere episode, Homer the Heretic, Homer has a direct conversation with God. A face-to-face conversation, rendered with the show's characteristic blend of comedy and sincerity. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. He will learn the meaning of life, God says, but not yet. His time is coming. The episode plays this for gentle theological humor and moves on. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches. God told Homer his time was nearly up, and 6 months later, Homer's conscious experience of the world ended. What the show presents as a theological gag reads, under the coma theory, as a preparation, a kindness even, a warning issued to a man who would not have understood its full meaning until the vending machine fell and the lights went out. Now consider the aging problem. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the central mystery of the floating timeline, the fact that resists every ordinary explanation and demands something more. The radiation theory proposes that mutated biology has disrupted normal developmental processes. The cartoon logic explanation says this is simply how animated shows work. But the coma theory offers something simpler and, depending on your emotional relationship with the show, something considerably more affecting. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April of 1993 and has not woken up. Of course, his children do not grow older. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was not there to witness it. His wife does not age because the last time he saw her clearly, she looked exactly as she looks in every episode. His friends remain frozen because his memory of them was fixed at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream preserves his world exactly as it existed on the day he lost it, because that is what comas do. They lock you in place. They freeze the world at the last moment of conscious experience and hold it there, unchanging. While time passes outside the hospital room and inside the dream, nothing moves at all. Every episode since April 1993 is Homer's brain running simulations of a life he is no longer living, using the only reference material available to it, the world as it existed on the day he went under. The celebrity appearances that flood the show's later seasons, which have always struck viewers as slightly excessive even by the generous standards of guest star culture in American television, make a different kind of sense under this framework. Homer's coma brain, receiving ambient stimuli from the hospital room, from the television playing in the background, from conversations happening at his bedside, from the radio, absorbs names and voices and cultural fragments. It processes them. It incorporates them into the dream, weaving them into the fabric of Springfield with the approximate fidelity of a mind working from half-heard sounds rather than direct experience. The celebrities are not famous people who happen to visit Springfield. They are voices Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, translated into dream characters by a brain trying to keep the simulation populated and running. The show itself has acknowledged this theory in ways that go beyond simple winking fan service. In season 34, an episode included what was presented as a deliberately leaked fake deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma, confirming that every outlandish episode had been a dream. The writers created this scene. They animated it fully. They showed it to the audience, and then they said it was not real, that it had been planted by hackers, that the whole thing was a hoax, but the fact that they made it at all tells you something significant. They know the theory exists. They have engaged with it seriously enough to produce a full animated response, and their denial of it was wrapped inside an episode that explicitly depicted Homer waking from a coma. They showed you the answer and told you it was a joke, and the audience laughed, the same way Homer laughed when he was told he had lost 5% of his brain. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. What he did not address in that interview or in any public statement since is why nobody ages, or what explains the seismic tonal shift between the pre-coma and post-coma seasons, or why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the vending machine fell, or why the show has become progressively more surreal and untethered from normal consequence with each passing season in a pattern that maps precisely onto what you would expect from a brain that is slowly deteriorating while its owner lies unconscious in a hospital. He just said it was not true, and moved on. The fans did not move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation has accomplished. It makes the show make complete sense. All of it, including the parts that otherwise feel like simple production carelessness. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the increasingly cartoonish plots, the reset button that erases every consequence between episodes, the fact that Homer can survive anything, and endure anything, and recover from anything, because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed on a specific floor of Springfield General. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one generating the story. And here's the part that stays with you. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional architecture of the entire show is not comedy. It is grief. Homer's deepest and most desperate wish is not complicated. He wants his family. That is all. He wants Marge to still love him, to still be there, to still look at him the way she looked at him on the day before the vending machine fell. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous and infuriating and genuinely beloved son. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room, working through something complicated, always working through something complicated, always the smartest person in the building and always slightly alone because of it. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in both hands. He wants Friday night at the Simpson house to last forever. In the coma, it does. The dream gives him everything. His family preserved and unchanging, his children never outgrowing him, his wife never leaving, his life never reaching its natural conclusion. Homer's coma is not a nightmare from which he cannot escape. Under this theory, it is the only version of heaven that a man like Homer Simpson would ever ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye because the story never ends. Every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and Evergreen Terrace returns to its familiar Sunday evening stillness, it is not the writers taking the easy way out. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story stop. Because if the story stops, if the dream crashes, if the simulation finally runs out of material, then Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has actually passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, whether there is anything left of the life he is dreaming about. Or worse, not waking up at all, just the dream going dark, and the long quiet, and the family on Evergreen Terrace slowly fading out like a television whose power has finally been cut. The show will never confirm the coma theory. It has said so, through its representatives, in plain language. But it will also never fully disprove it, because the evidence for it is not something you can simply dismiss. It is baked into the structure of the show. It is in the tonal shift that everyone has noticed and nobody has fully explained. It is in the aging freeze that no other theory resolves with the same emotional clarity. It is in God's warning to a man whose time was coming, and in the vending machine that fell 6 months later. And in the 5% of Homer's brain that never came back. Nobody ages. Reality keeps getting stranger. And Homer always finds his way back to Evergreen Terrace by the end of the episode. Because in his dream, he never left. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before we go any further, let's acknowledge something. You know the official answer. Season 7, Episode 1, Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 2. Case closed. The baby did it. Maggie Simpson, acting in defense of her lollipop, picked up Burns's gun from the pavement outside the town meeting, and the gun discharged. Burns was hit. Mystery solved. Except the case was never really closed. And the more carefully you look at the evidence, the more you realize that the official answer has some significant problems. Problems that the show itself has flagged, obliquely and directly, across the years since the mystery was supposedly resolved. Let's go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 1. The summer of 1995. The Simpsons had been building toward this moment all season, and the show's execution of the setup was, by any standard, remarkable television. This was something that had never been attempted by an animated show before. A genuine, sustained mystery. A whodunit designed with enough internal logic that the show's creators felt comfortable inviting the viewing public to participate in a national contest to identify the shooter. The prize was substantial. The winner would be animated into a future episode. Fox promoted the event the way networks use to promote actual events. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special treating the fictional crime as an unsolved real-world case. For that summer, the question of who shot Mr. Burns was a genuine piece of national cultural conversation. The crime itself was the logical culmination of Burns pushing his Springfield monopoly to its absolute extreme. He had stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's funding. He had bankrupted Moe's Tavern by driving its owner into financial ruin. He had created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle. He had injured Santa's little helper, the family dog, in a way serious enough to require veterinary intervention. And for his finale, he constructed a giant mechanical disc capable of blocking the sun over the entire town, intended to force every resident to purchase their electricity from his plant because there would be no solar alternative available to them. When Smithers protested this last action, Burns fired him on the spot. By the time the town meeting assembled at the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield had a documented reason to want Charles Montgomery Burns dead. The show took careful, deliberate time to establish this. Homer, because Burns could not remember his name after years of employment at the plant. Bart and Lisa, because the school's funding was gone. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home was rubble. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his position when the school collapsed. Tito Puente, because the music program was cut. Moe, because his livelihood was destroyed. Even Smithers, freshly fired and in psychological freefall. The town gathered. Burns appeared. Multiple people were visibly armed. And then Burns collapsed with a single gunshot wound, staggering onto the town's sundial and falling, his hands landing on specific letters, W and S, from one perspective. From Burns's own perspective, looking up at the dial from below, M and S. The screen went dark. America waited through the entire summer. Here is what the show told us when Part 2 arrived. The investigation is conducted with the comedic incompetence you would expect from Springfield's police department. Smithers confesses immediately, but his confession collapses when it becomes clear he was blackout drunk at the time and had actually shot old Jasper in his wooden leg. Wrong victim, Wrong location, wrong crime entirely. Suspects are eliminated one by one. Principal Skinner has an alibi. Moe has an alibi. Tito Puente has the greatest alibi in television history. A full musical number explaining that he channeled his rage into a samba performance rather than physical violence. The investigation stalls until an eyelash is recovered from Burns's suit. DNA analysis identifies it as belonging to a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints are found on the gun. Homer had the most clearly established motive of anyone at the meeting. He is arrested. He is about to be convicted. And then Burns wakes from his coma, looks around the hospital room, and identifies his attacker. It was Maggie, the baby. She had taken the gun from Burns's holster in the parking lot during a confrontation over a lollipop, and the weapon had discharged. Case closed. Except not quite. Start with the contest. Thousands of entries were submitted from viewers across the country, each one identifying who they believed had pulled the trigger based on the clues embedded in Part 1. According to the DVD commentary for the episodes, from the producers themselves, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was eventually given to a contestant chosen at random who, because they had not identified Maggie, received a cash payment instead of the animated cameo they had been promised. The writers acknowledged awareness of one person who had posted the correct answer online on the night of the original broadcast, using a college internet account that was no longer active by the time the contest ended. They issued an open invitation for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Consider what this tells you about the mystery's design. The creators said the answer was discoverable from the clues in Part 1. They built a national contest around this claim, and then when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody in the pool of contestants had found it. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not follow logically from the evidence in the way the show had suggested it would. Now look at the specific evidence. Burns falls onto the sundial and his hands point to W and S, which from his own perspective are M and S. The show uses this to point toward Maggie Simpson, but Burns himself stated, explicitly and on the record within the show's own narrative, that his hands landing on those letters was not deliberate. He did not position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He simply fell. The sundial, the central piece of physical evidence that the show uses to justify its answer, was described by the victim as a coincidence. The most prominent clue in the mystery is meaningless, according to the one person best positioned to know what it meant. Then there is the matter of Burns's gun. Shortly before the shooting, the show established that Burns's holster was empty. The gun was already absent from his person before the town meeting reached its violent climax. Whoever shot Burns used the weapon that he had been carrying. This means the shooter was someone who did not arrive at the meeting armed. Most of the suspects had brought weapons specifically because their anger at Burns was at the point where violence felt like a live option. The person who shot Burns was someone who had not planned to shoot anyone, who encountered the gun by chance and acted impulsively or opportunistically in the moment. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does a significant number of other characters who were not carrying weapons that evening. Burns's last words before being shot were simply, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not afraid. He was not surprised. He greeted the person who was about to shoot him the way you would acknowledge a familiar face you were not expecting to see at a particular moment. Has Burns ever had a meaningful interaction with Maggie Simpson prior to this episode? The show does not establish a prior relationship between them. Burns can barely retain the name of the employee who has worked directly for him for decades. The idea that he would spot an infant in a parking lot and respond with calm recognition, with the casual acknowledgement of someone he knows, requires a stretch that the evidence as presented does not comfortably support. In Season 18, Homer makes a statement that the show presents as a throwaway moment, but which carries substantial weight when examined. He simply claims, out loud, on camera, that he was the one who shot Burns. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer states that he committed an attempted murder of the richest and most powerful man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a background joke in an episode about something else entirely. Either Homer is lying, which is consistent with his character and remains possible, or the original verdict was wrong, and Homer knows it because he is the person who actually pulled the trigger. And if Homer did it, then Maggie was blamed for a crime her father committed. An infant was scapegoated because infants cannot be prosecuted, cannot offer a meaningful defense, cannot understand what they are being accused of, and will never be punished regardless of the verdict. Chief Wiggum says this explicitly. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect fall person. Too young to dispute the charge, too young to understand it, too young for the legal system to touch her even if the evidence were conclusive. There is another theory that has accumulated genuine traction, built around a reading of the evidence that is surprisingly coherent. Marge. The argument goes like this. Marge Simpson watched Burns systematically destroy everything she cares about. He gutted her children's school. He injured her family's dog. He stole the son from the town where she is raising her children. She is a devoted and fundamentally protective person. She had every reason. And Burns, in a previous episode, had developed an infatuation with Marge significant enough that it affected his behavior toward her. If Burns recognized Marge in the parking lot, if it was Marge's face that produced the "oh, it's you" of calm recognition, then his decision not to name her as his shooter after waking from the coma becomes explicable. He protected her. He woke up, identified her face, and chose to let the investigation find its own direction rather than condemn the woman he had been fixated on. The alternate endings that were produced for this mystery are themselves evidence of how unsettled the question remained, even in the writer's room. A complete alternate conclusion was animated in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter, fully voiced, fully produced, a complete alternate resolution to the mystery. This ending was shown in a clip show episode where it was dismissed with a joke about how ignoring DNA evidence would be impractical. The joke is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had concluded shortly before the episodes aired, in which a jury did exactly that. The show is telling you, through that joke, that official evidence can be made to point wherever the people conducting the investigation need it to point, and that juries and investigators ignore inconvenient evidence all the time when the narrative demands a particular conclusion. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. This was considered seriously enough by the writers that plans were made to send the character to prison. It was abandoned. The point is that the answer was not predetermined by the evidence. The evidence was arranged to fit whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was constructed in reverse, and that reverse construction shows in the final product if you look at it carefully enough. The official answer is Maggie. The show has committed to this, but the contest that nobody won, the sundial clue that Burns himself called meaningless, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's casual Season 18 confession, and the final image of Maggie alone in the room, reenacting the shooting with careful attention to whether anyone is watching, all of it suggests that the greatest mystery in The Simpsons' history was not so much solved as it was closed. There is one more layer that deserves attention before we move on, which is the way the mystery functions within the social structure of Springfield itself. In any real community, the attempted murder of its wealthiest and most powerful resident would produce sustained, serious, organized investigation. The resources that a billionaire's office can bring to bear on identifying a criminal suspect are substantial. Burns has lawyers and investigators, and the ability to make life extremely uncomfortable for anyone in Springfield who stands between him and the information he wants. And yet the investigation was short, comedic, and conclusive in a way that served everyone's convenience. Smithers confessed and then recanted. Homer was briefly arrested. Burns woke up and pointed at a baby. And the whole thing was closed with the observation that no jury would convict an infant. Case closed. Everyone went home. The sun came back on. Life on Evergreen Terrace resumed its familiar patterns. If someone in Springfield with enough knowledge of Burns's movements, enough understanding of the political and social dynamics at play, and enough foresight to recognize that a baby would be the perfect cover, wanted to ensure that the investigation ended quickly and pointed away from the real shooter, they could not have arranged it more effectively than it was arranged. The investigation reached its conclusion with remarkable speed. The evidence that pointed toward a Simpson was given significant weight. The evidence that complicates the Maggie conclusion was noted and then set aside. The question of who benefited from the investigation ending where it ended is worth sitting with. Burns survived and retained his position. His attacker was identified as someone who could not be prosecuted. The more serious and motivated suspects were all cleared. Life in Springfield went back to normal. In Springfield, those are two very different things, solving a mystery and closing it. And the mechanisms for closing inconvenient truths, as we have been seeing throughout this entire conversation, are very well developed in that town. The show knew this when it made the joke about ignoring DNA evidence. It was telling you that the verdict in Springfield is not necessarily the truth. It was telling you that the truth in Springfield is frequently what the town decides the truth is, through whatever combination of evidence and denial and convenient omission allows the community to move forward without confronting anything too uncomfortable. The case is closed. The mystery is not. Section 5. The immortality of Charles Montgomery Burns. This is not a rhetorical question. It is not a cartoon logic question. A simple matter of animated characters outliving the normal human lifespan because narrative convenience demands it. Within the specific, documented, canonical facts of the Simpsons universe, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility. His age has been stated, implied, and contradicted across dozens of episodes over the show's run, but every version of the timeline, even the most conservative reading, places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. Burns has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has described first-hand experience of events from the 1910s. He has spoken about working relationships with historical figures who died before the show's contemporary audience was born. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, in a capacity that the show depicts as morally complicated. He stole $1 trillion bill from the United States government during that war and kept it hidden for decades. He has described the Gilded Age not as history he learned from books, but as an era he experienced directly. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By a more generous reading of the show's accumulated continuity, he may be approaching 140. And he does not simply exist at that age, he operates. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with active strategic intelligence. He manipulates municipal politics with a sophistication that requires genuine understanding of how power works. He orchestrates schemes that demand sustained cognitive effort, long-term planning, and a working grasp of modern finance and technology and legal infrastructure. His body is frail, yes. His physical strength is almost non-existent, but his mind is razor-sharp. Burns is arguably the most consistently strategic and cognitively capable character in Springfield, and he has been operating at that level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained, functional consciousness. The show addresses the mechanism directly in the Springfield Files episode, though it does so in the middle of a comedic setup about Homer seeing what he thinks is an alien in the woods. Burns, it turns out, undergoes a weekly medical treatment so extreme in its effects that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without it, his biological systems begin to fail. The margin for error is essentially zero. His life is maintained the way you maintain a precision machine, through scheduled servicing, careful calibration, and the understanding that missing a single appointment has catastrophic and irreversible consequences. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for generations is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological function. Burns is not simply profiting from nuclear power while remaining personally insulated from its effects. He is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by proximity to nuclear material over such an extended period that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. It requires external radiation input the way an ordinary human body requires food and water. Deprive it of that input and the system begins to shut down within days. This explains something the show has depicted repeatedly without ever fully examining Burns's immune system. In one of the series' most famous scenes, Burns visits a doctor for a routine examination and learns that he carries every disease known to medical science simultaneously. Every single one. All present in his body at the same time, existing in a state of perfect biological equilibrium, each condition canceling out the others. The doctor describes it as 3 Stooges syndrome. 3 conditions, each one trying to be the first through a doorway, none of them able to gain enough dominance to progress because the others are blocking the way. Burns is technically the sickest man in the United States, the doctor concludes, and also functionally indestructible, because every disease that should kill him is being perpetually blocked by every other disease that should kill him. This is played entirely for comedy and has become one of the most quoted moments in the show's history. But if you accept the radiation theory's framework and apply it here, something shifts. Burns's body is not maintaining this equilibrium through any natural biological process. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. They are not curing his diseases. They are managing them, holding each one in careful stasis, preventing any single condition from gaining enough momentum to overwhelm the others and progress toward lethality. It is not medicine in any conventional understanding of the word. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body functions like a reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods, preventing a meltdown through continuous, precise, technically demanding intervention. Smithers, within this framework, is not simply a devoted personal assistant or a man held in place by a complicated emotional attachment to his employer. Smithers is Burns's life support system. He manages the treatment schedule. He ensures Burns makes every appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with an obsessive attentiveness that has been played for comedy across hundreds of episodes, but that, examined seriously, looks less like devotion and more like the vigilance of someone who understands that a single missed appointment ends everything. The show has established, through multiple episodes, that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, Burns would be physically helpless. Not in the emotional or organizational sense, but in the medical sense. Without Smithers managing the treatment protocol, Burns would miss a dose. The disease equilibrium would collapse, and every illness in his body would surge forward simultaneously, turning his biological gridlock from a state of indestructible stasis into a catastrophic cascade. Smithers stays not only because he wants to, but because he knows, with complete clarity, that leaving is a death sentence he would be handing to another person. That knowledge is the actual foundation of their relationship. Underneath whatever else is happening between them, there is a simple, terrible fact. Smithers is keeping Burns alive through logistical competence, and he is the only person in the world who fully understands this. Burns's relationship to historical time adds another dimension to the immortality question. The show has positioned the Burns family as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful dynasties in American history. They were wealthy before the Industrial Revolution. Their fortune predates the nation in some accounts. The current Burns did not build an empire from nothing. He inherited and extended an empire that was already ancient when he took control of it. The question this raises, which the show gestures toward without ever directly answering, is whether Burns is unique or whether the family has always found methods to extend individual lifespans beyond normal biological limits. Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before any of the specific technologies that currently keep Burns alive, did the Burns dynasty employ different mechanisms to maintain their hold on power across generations that should have seen multiple successions? The show does not say, but it does establish that the family has maintained continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not happen through normal generational succession and luck. It requires either extraordinary circumstance or extraordinary measures. Burns has survived things that should have ended him. He was shot by Maggie Simpson or whoever actually pulled that trigger, and he came back. He has been hospitalized dozens of times across the show's run. He has been abandoned in wilderness conditions that would kill a normal elderly person within days. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been subjected to circumstances that should have conclusively finished him, and every single time, he comes back. Not through the passive cartoon resilience that allows Homer to survive equivalent trauma, not through the simple logic of the show needing its characters to be available next episode. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through the application of money and medical resources and institutional knowledge in quantities that transform survival from a matter of biology into a matter of capital. Homer's survival is incidental. Burns's survival is engineered. Every dollar Burns has ever spent, every institution he has ever corrupted, every politician he has ever purchased, every physician he has ever retained, every piece of medical infrastructure he has quietly built around himself over decades, all of it serves a single purpose: to ensure that the mechanism continues to function, that the treatments keep coming, that the diseases stay balanced, that the reactor keeps running. Burns has not simply accumulated wealth. He has spent a century constructing a system specifically designed to guarantee his own continued existence, regardless of what happens to his physical body on any given day. The scariest element of the Burns immortality question is not the possibility that he might persist indefinitely. It is the recognition that Springfield needs him to. The town's economic survival depends on the power plant. The plant depends on Burns's ownership and operational decisions. Burns's continued existence depends on the medical infrastructure that his wealth provides. It is a closed loop, self-sustaining, each element feeding the others in a cycle that has been running for generations and shows no signs of reaching a natural conclusion. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot function without him. Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to account for what it has done to the people living inside it. The town is trapped in dependency, and the dependency is complete enough that the question of whether it would be better off without him is one that its residents are simply not equipped to ask. He is not immortal. He is something more specific and more troubling than immortal. He is too expensive to die. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the silent architect. Maggie Simpson does not talk. She does not walk with reliable consistency. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She communicates primarily through pacifier noises, the occasional dramatically timed stare, and a series of gestures that suggest, to anyone paying close enough attention, a level of intentionality that has no business existing inside a 12-month-old human. She has also, across those 36 years, accomplished more than every other member of her family put together. She shot a billionaire. Whether she intended to or whether the gun simply discharged at an unfortunate moment is a question we have already examined and will leave open. She led a rebellion of infants against a tyrannical daycare administrator, organizing and executing a coordinated operation involving multiple moving parts, strategic timing, and the ability to anticipate and counter an adult authority figure's responses. She has saved her family from life-threatening situations on more occasions than the show has bothered to count. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that would be remarkable in an adult and are essentially inexplicable in a baby who has not learned to form sentences. She was tested at various points across the show's run and found to possess intelligence that existing standardized assessments were not designed to measure. And through all of it, every remarkable thing she has done, every moment of capability that should have prompted someone to stop and look more carefully at the baby sitting quietly in the corner, she maintains her silence. Not because she cannot speak, because she chooses not to. Maggie's first word was voiced, in a genuine piece of casting that the show played as a momentous occasion, by Elizabeth Taylor. The word was daddy. It happened once. It was never repeated. Maggie has spent 36 years in a household populated by extremely verbal people, surrounded by constant noise and argument and passionate expression, and she has chosen to contribute almost nothing to it. Not because she lacks the capacity, because she has calculated, with an intelligence that her physical form conceals almost perfectly, that silence serves her better than speech. Start with The Longest Daycare, a theatrical short released in 2012 and screened in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift. It was nominated for an Academy Award. It runs 7 minutes. And those 7 minutes are essentially a sustained argument that Maggie Simpson is operating at a cognitive level that her 1-year-old body cannot fully support, but that her intelligence compensates for so effectively that the limitation barely slows her down. The premise: Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with authoritarian efficiency by a staff that monitors, categorizes, and manages its infant charges with institutional coldness. Inside the facility, Maggie encounters a caterpillar in the process of forming its chrysalis. She recognizes its vulnerability. She wants to protect it. Another infant, the recurring antagonist Gerald, wants to destroy it. What follows is a 7-minute sequence in which Maggie reads her physical environment for threat and opportunity, identifies the specific capabilities and limitations of every person and barrier between her and her objective, develops a multi-step response to each obstacle as it appears, and executes the whole plan with timing and spatial awareness that require a kind of cognitive processing that developmental science does not associate with children anywhere near her stated age. She does all of this without speaking. She does it with the motor skills of a baby who falls down regularly and cannot walk a straight line across a room without incident. Her body keeps failing her. Her mind never does. Every decision she makes in that short film is correct. Every adaptation she makes to unexpected complications is appropriate. She is operating at a strategic level while encased in a physical form that can barely get across a room without sitting down unexpectedly. This is Maggie's central paradox. The body and the mind are in violent disagreement about what she should be capable of. Now consider why she does not speak. Look at what the show has done with the other intelligent woman in the Simpson family. Lisa Simpson is brilliant by any measure the show applies. Her IQ is exceptional. Her grasp of subjects that challenge most adults is established early and maintained consistently. She plays the saxophone with genuine skill. She reads. She thinks. She pushes back against the injustices she encounters with a persistence that is both admirable and, within the context of Springfield, functionally exhausting. Lisa speaks up. Lisa makes herself known. Lisa announces her intelligence and her opinions and her moral objections clearly and consistently. And the return on this investment has been, across 36 years, essentially nothing. Lisa is dismissed. Lisa is ignored. Lisa is occasionally praised by guest characters who appear for a single episode and then vanish, but within the permanent structure of her world, her intelligence and her moral clarity have purchased her very little beyond a specific kind of loneliness that the show depicts with genuine, unflinching honesty. The smartest person in the building is also, most of the time, the most isolated. Maggie has watched this happen for her entire life. She has been observing it since the day she was born. And somewhere in that observation, in the accumulation of all those moments where Lisa spoke and was dismissed, where Lisa pushed and was pushed back, where Lisa's genuine exceptional quality was met with indifference or mild condescension from the environment around her, Maggie drew a conclusion. Silence is armor. Invisibility is power. The less they notice you, the more you can do. Every heroic act Maggie has ever performed happened below the radar. The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to spot them organizing. The shooting of Burns happened in a parking lot, in the dark, after most of the adults had left the scene. Every act of genuine capability, every moment where Maggie's intelligence manifested in a way that mattered, it happened in the spaces where nobody was looking carefully enough to see it. This is not accidental. Maggie has arranged it this way. She maintains the most effective disguise available to her. She pretends to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be. Quiet, passive, dependent, limited. She is none of those things. She is the inverse of all of them. And she has spent 36 years making sure nobody figures that out, because the moment someone notices, the advantage disappears. Consider the radiation theory's implications for Maggie specifically. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations that affect each person differently, then Maggie and Homer represent opposite endpoints of the same process. Homer's exposure, filtering through whatever specific vulnerabilities his biology carried, reduced his cognitive function dramatically. The crayon in his brain is a metaphor, but it is also a literal physical fact. Something is obstructing Homer's ability to think clearly, and the radiation has compounded that, layering chronic neurological impairment on top of the existing obstruction until Homer's intelligence sits at the lower boundary of clinical disability. Maggie, born in Springfield to parents who had both already been soaking in the contaminated environment for years, breathing and drinking the same poisoned medium, experienced something different, something that went in the other direction. The mutation that diminished Homer amplified Maggie. The same environmental cause produced the opposite cognitive result, and the result is a 1-year-old with intelligence that cannot be properly measured by tools designed to assess normal human development because she is operating somewhere above the range those tools were built to capture. Homer and Maggie are the same experiment with different outcomes. He is what the radiation takes away, she is what the radiation gives. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's extraordinary capability takes on a different and more affecting meaning. If every episode since April 1993 is Homer's unconscious mind generating a dream of the family he lost, then Maggie's intelligence is Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child, projected into the dream as a kind of prayer. He cannot see her grow up. He cannot watch her walk or hear her speak or learn who she becomes. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her the intelligence and the capability that he himself was robbed of. He makes her able to handle anything, survive anything, protect herself and the people she loves, because he needs to believe, lying in that hospital bed with his family sitting around him and the years passing outside the window, that Maggie will be okay without him there. Her genius in this reading is not a radiation mutation or a developmental anomaly. It is a father's prayer given narrative form. But back in Springfield, in whatever version of Springfield is real, there is another interpretation. Maggie watches everything. She remembers everything. She understands everything that happens around her and makes deliberate choices about how and when to respond to it. And she is waiting for something. The show never tells us what. Maggie's endgame, whatever she is building toward through 36 years of careful, patient observation, is the last genuinely unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. She has shown us what she is capable of in glimpses. A gun discharged, a room full of babies organized, a butterfly protected against an adversary twice her size, a family saved from multiple distinct varieties of peril, a single nod that confirms or denies a person's innocence with a reliability that the adults around her have learned, without quite articulating it, to trust. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot cross a room without falling down. She has not spoken a meaningful sentence in 36 years. She is also the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She just has not decided what she is going to do about it yet. Section 7. Mona Simpson and the Burns Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official version of events, and it was told with enough conviction that most viewers accepted it without question. Abe Simpson had told Homer his mother died when he was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned her in the way that children mourn parents they never really knew, with a grief that is more about the absence of something than the loss of a specific person. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had chosen to leave the world before she finished raising him. This belief shaped everything about Homer: his desperate and somewhat undiscriminating need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, the intensity of his attachment to the one person who has consistently, stubbornly, bafflingly chosen to stay, his terror of abandonment, which sits underneath the comedy of his personality like a structural element that the humor has been built on top of, his willingness to absorb humiliation and indifference from his employer rather than risk the confrontation that might cost him the one stable thing left in his life. Homer's entire emotional architecture, every compulsion and fear and desperate reaching toward connection, is a coping mechanism for maternal loss. And in Season 7, the show revealed that the loss was constructed, that the grave Abe showed him was not his mother's, that his mother was alive, had been alive the entire time, and that the man responsible for separating them was Charles Montgomery Burns. The episode is Mother Simpson, and it is widely considered one of the finest hours the show ever produced. Homer discovers the truth through a cascade of bureaucratic coincidence. While attempting to correct a false death record at the Municipal Hall of Records, he finds evidence that his mother's death was never officially documented because it never occurred. He finds her at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave, and the reunion between them is one of the show's genuinely unguarded emotional moments. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to a famous poet because Abe Simpson needed something that looked like a grave, and Walt Whitman's was available. Mona tells Homer the truth. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because staying would have endangered him. Because the man who signs Homer's paychecks, the man Homer has spent his entire adult life working for without understanding the connection, had destroyed her life and forced her into hiding. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was ordinary in the way that most people are ordinary before something extraordinary happens to them. Married to Abe, mother to a young Homer, living a quiet Springfield life while the world outside was burning through the counterculture and the protests and the generational upheaval that the late 60s produced in America with such remarkable intensity. Something reached her. The show depicts her radicalization with its characteristic light touch but does not undercut the legitimacy of what motivated her. Mona joined a group of activists, and they targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Let that settle. Burns did not simply own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a facility manufacturing biological weapons, weaponized pathogens, designed and produced in Springfield, in the same community where children were attending school and families were building their lives. The richest man in town was cooking up diseases in a laboratory while his neighbors went about their lives with no knowledge that the facility existed. Mona's group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agents stored inside. During the chaos of the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The operation succeeded. The pathogens were destroyed. But in the confusion of the escape, Mona stopped. Someone had been knocked down in the chaos. She stopped to help them up. The person she helped was Mr. Burns. Burns saw her face. He identified her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe. She could not hold her son or explain to him why she had to disappear. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping, a detail that carries an extraordinary weight when you sit with it, a mother saying goodbye to her child in the dark because the morning would be too dangerous, and she was gone. 27 years. Homer woke up and his mother was not there. His father told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 3 decades building the emotional life of a man who grew up believing that he was the kind of child a mother would rather leave than raise. Burns did not simply identify Mona and step back. He pursued her. He maintained an active effort to locate her for decades after the 1969 raid, driven by a personal grudge that time did not diminish. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He sees her through a cab window and calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, this time knowing why she is leaving, knowing who is responsible, and knowing that the person responsible is the man whose name is on his paycheck. Homer processes this information and does not connect the dots. He does not quit. He does not confront Burns. He does not even seem to fully integrate the relationship between the billionaire who forced his mother underground for 27 years and the billionaire who has employed him, barely tolerating his existence and frequently unable to recall his name for his entire adult career. Homer's inability to make this connection is not played as willful avoidance. It is played as tragedy, because Homer is not capable of that kind of connection. His brain does not work that way anymore. The radiation, the crayon, the decades of cognitive erosion from living in Springfield's contaminated environment. Homer is too comprehensively damaged to perceive the architecture of his own suffering. And this is where the conspiracy extends beyond the simple cruelty of Burns ruining one woman's life out of spite. Burns did not simply ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, at the exact developmental moment when maternal attachment and emotional security are most foundational to the person a child will become, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up with specific and exploitable vulnerabilities, desperate for approval, incapable of sustained defiance, terrified of abandonment in ways that made confronting authority feel like an existential threat, grateful for any scrap of recognition from the powerful people around him, because recognition was the thing his childhood most lacked. This is the perfect psychological profile for the safety inspector Burns needed at the nuclear plant. Not a competent safety inspector, obviously. The last thing Burns needed was someone who would actually do that job. He needed someone who would occupy the position without performing its function. Someone who was too emotionally compromised to recognize that their employment was not an act of kindness but a tool for maintaining a specific operational condition at the facility. Someone who would show up every day, touch the console, eat the donut, fall asleep at the workstation, and ensure through their comprehensive failure that the violations continued and the radiation kept leaking and the water stayed poisoned. Homer does not work at the power plant because he is too incompetent to find better employment. Homer works at the power plant because Burns broke him when he was 6 years old and his mother vanished in the night. And the broken version of Homer is exactly what Burns's operation requires. The show confirms and extends this conspiracy through a detail revealed in a later season. Burns had committed a crime, unspecified in ways that the show leaves deliberately vague, and Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer permanent employment at the plant, regardless of performance, regardless of errors. Homer's job security, the thing that has always seemed like a simple cartoon convenience to explain why an objectively catastrophic employee keeps his position, was a contractual arrangement brokered in secret between his father and the man who destroyed his family. 742 documented performance failures, never permanently dismissed, because the deal protected him. Homer's mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program and paid for it with 27 years of her life. That billionaire retaliated by destroying her family in ways she would never fully understand from her hiding places across the country. Her husband negotiated with the enemy to protect what remained. Her son inherited the consequences of all of it, growing up emotionally damaged and cognitively impaired, spending his adult life employed by the person who took everything from him, strangling his son affectionately on the couch every evening in a house that runs on electricity generated by the same facility that poisoned his water and funded the empire of the man who stole his childhood. 3 generations of one family, broken by one man's grudge and one town's inability or unwillingness to resist it. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Homer was with her. He held her hand. He watched the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. Without a joke to soften it, without a cutaway gag to give the audience somewhere to look that was easier, just a man and his mother and the 27 years between them pressing down on both of them in a quiet hospital room that looked nothing like the one Homer has been lying in the coma theory's telling. Since April of 1993, The Simpsons has always been, underneath the jokes and the couch gags and the guest appearances and the predictions and the mysteries, a story about a family. About what holds families together and what tears them apart and what it costs a person to lose the things they needed most at the moments they needed them most. Mona's story, and the conspiracy that connects it to Burns and to Homer's broken potential, and to the deal Grandpa made, and to the job Homer has been working his entire life without ever understanding why he has it, is the purest expression of what the show is actually doing underneath everything else it appears to be doing. Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant because his grandfather made a deal, and because his mother made a choice, and because the richest man in town needed exactly the kind of broken man that Burns himself had spent decades creating. Homer was broken before he ever clocked in for his first shift. Section 8. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Denial Machine. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. It aired on the 28th of September 1997, and the reaction it produced has not fully subsided in the nearly 3 decades since. Fans were furious. Critics were harsh. Harry Shearer, who provides the voice for Principal Skinner among many other Springfield residents, publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline. The episode remains consistently listed among the series' most divisive installments, and the most common criticism is a specific one. This episode broke continuity. It took a character who had been carefully established over 8 seasons and revealed that everything we knew about him was built on a lie. It was a betrayal, a cheap twist, a piece of narrative vandalism that cost the show credibility it never fully recovered. That is one way to read it. Here is another. Springfield Elementary holds an event celebrating Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger arrives. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real one, a decorated Vietnam War veteran, believed killed when he was captured as a prisoner of war, who survived his captivity, escaped, and has returned home to discover that someone else has been living inside his identity for the past 2 decades. The imposter's real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, he was a street punk from nowhere with nothing, drafted into the army and assigned to the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian felt the weight of that loss in a specific and personal way. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had an identity worth preserving, simply went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the history, the mother, the career, the relationships, the whole constructed identity, and he lived inside it for 20 years, until the real Skinner walked through the gymnasium door and the construction collapsed. What happens next is the part that the episode's critics found most infuriating, but which is also, examined carefully, the episode's actual point. Springfield holds a meeting. The real Skinner is present. Tamzarian is present. The truth is fully and publicly documented. Every resident of Springfield who cares to be informed now knows that the man running their school is a fraud, that his identity was stolen from a war veteran who survived capture and came home to find his life occupied by someone else. The deception is complete. The evidence is conclusive. The community has everything it needs to act on the truth. And the community votes to ignore it. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree stating that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero, the man whose identity was stolen from him, is placed on a train and physically removed from Springfield. The judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever reference the truth of the situation under penalty of punishment. The community chose the lie. They chose it unanimously, deliberately, after having been presented with the full truth and given ample opportunity to respond to it differently. The real Skinner was not expelled because the evidence was insufficient. He was expelled because the community found him inconvenient. The truth he represented was too disruptive to the comfortable version of reality they had been living in for 2 decades. This is, the episode's critics argued, a betrayal of everything the show had built. It destroyed Skinner's character. It made 8 seasons of his development retroactively meaningless. But what if it did something else? What if it did something the show had never done before, which is show you the machinery? Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable fictions over uncomfortable facts. The town has always agreed to forget whatever does not fit the version of events it prefers. The three-eyed fish appeared and the town moved on. The dome came down and the town moved on. Burns blocked out the sun and the town moved on. Catastrophe after catastrophe, contradiction after contradiction, each one absorbed and forgotten with a speed and completeness that has always been one of the show's most consistent features. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode where the show lets you watch the mechanism operate in real time. It does not happen off-screen between episodes, quietly resolved by the floating timeline. It happens in front of you, in a public meeting, through a formal legal proceeding, with an explicit decree and a physical punishment for anyone who breaks the consensus. The community's amnesia is not accidental in this episode. It is institutional. It is voted on. It is enforced by the legal system. It is, in the most literal sense the show has ever been, a collective choice. Every time Springfield resets after a world-changing event, the Principal and the Pauper is showing you how that works. Not through radiation damage or coma brain dream logic, though those frameworks apply elsewhere. Through a social contract that the town enforces against anyone who insists on the truth. The real Skinner was not dangerous. He was not threatening. He was simply true. And the truth was enough to earn him exile and a legal prohibition against his name being spoken. The show knows what this means. It knows exactly what it is diagnosing in that episode. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset. Because confronting what actually happened would require confronting everything else that the official narrative has been papering over. The dome means confronting the pollution. The pollution means confronting the plant. The plant means confronting Burns. Confronting Burns means the economy collapses. The economy collapsing means the town as its residents know it ceases to exist. So they forget. They vote to forget. They make forgetting mandatory. And anyone who remembers too clearly, anyone who arrives with proof that the official story is a fabrication, gets tied to a train and removed from the community before the disturbance can spread. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He showed up with the truth, and the town's response was to criminalize his presence and erase his name. That is not a comedy beat. That is a precise, accurate depiction of how real communities maintain impossible fictions. Small towns, and not only small ones, have a remarkable capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried. Crimes get forgotten. Uncomfortable truths get retold, until the retelling becomes the official version, and the original event exists only in the memories of the people the community has learned to dismiss or exclude. Springfield did not do anything unusual in The Principal and the Pauper. Springfield did something universal. It just did it on camera. And if the coma theory is true, if every episode since April 1993 is Homer's unconscious mind generating a sustained dream, then this episode takes on one more layer. Homer's dreaming brain invented a scenario in which an entire community votes to sustain a lie rather than accept a truth that would unsettle everything. Because that is what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real through collective agreement and the force of legal decree. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the real one, and that nobody, no real Skinner with a train ticket and a decree of exile, will ever force a final reckoning. Because Homer's coma is itself a stolen identity, a dream masquerading as reality. And as long as Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, as long as the community holds the line against anyone who arrives with inconvenient evidence, Homer's dream continues. The story goes on. Evergreen Terrace stays standing. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most honest one. It is the only episode that shows you the infrastructure of Springfield's denial in explicit institutional detail. And the reason fans rejected it so completely is that they did not want to see that infrastructure. They wanted the comfortable version, the one where Skinner is who he has always appeared to be, where the continuity holds, where the official story is the true one, which is exactly what Springfield voted for. Section 9. The predictions, prophecy, or mirror. Let's get the famous ones acknowledged. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future timeline in which Lisa Simpson had become the first female president of the United States. In the same episode, her predecessor in the Oval Office was identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. The internet's response when the connection was noticed was immediate and enormous. Screenshots circulated. The phrase "The Simpsons predicted it" became one of the most reliably shared formulas on social media. People who had not watched the show in 2 decades were suddenly sharing clips and asking, with genuine bewilderment, how the writers could possibly have known. There is a long list beyond this. In 1995, the show depicted a device worn on the wrist that functions essentially as a modern smartwatch. In 1994, Homer went to space with Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial space tourism became a functional industry. In 1998, Homer encountered a mathematical equation that physicists later noted bore a striking resemblance to a formula used in calculating the Higgs boson mass, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. A 1,999 episode proposed the universe might be shaped like a donut, and cosmologists subsequently found radiation patterns suggesting the universe may indeed have a toroidal topology. In 1993, a flu virus originating in Asia spread to Springfield and caused mass panic buying, and a frantic search for an effective treatment, airing 27 years before a real pandemic produced nearly identical scenes in cities around the world. In 1996, a joke depicted Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra during a performance, an exact scenario that materialized in 2024 when Cypress Hill performed with the LSO at the Royal Albert Hall. In 1998, the show depicted Disney acquiring the Fox Corporation, which actually happened in 2019. The list goes on long enough that compiling it fully would require its own dedicated project. Every few months, a new one surfaces. Every new surfacing produces the same cycle of amazement and mild conspiracy-adjacent wondering. The official explanation, delivered by the show's own producers and confirmed by fact-checking organizations that have examined the most prominent claims, is less dramatic than the cultural response to it suggests. Al Jean, executive producer across much of the show's run, has put it bluntly: if you throw enough darts, you will eventually hit some bullseyes. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, satirical observations, and extrapolated commentary on the direction American culture appears to be heading. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some portion of it will inevitably align with subsequent events through sheer statistical probability. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most creatively productive seasons, stated it more plainly still. There are very few cases where the show actually predicted something. Most apparent predictions are coincidences, because the episodes are old enough that history tends to repeat itself. Fact-checking organizations have worked through the most popular claims and found that many of them have mundane explanations. The Trump prediction did not emerge from some special foreknowledge. Trump had been publicly flirting with running for president since the late 1980s, making occasional pronouncements and floating the idea in interviews and public appearances for over a decade before the show depicted it. The writers observed a pattern that was already visible in the culture and pushed it to its logical, absurd extreme. The Disney-Fox merger was not predicted. Media consolidation was an accelerating trend that anyone following the entertainment industry was watching carefully, and the joke imagined that trend reaching its logical conclusion. The smartwatch was not predicted. Wrist-mounted personal technology was a staple of science fiction and future speculation throughout the 20th century, and the show depicted a version of it that aligned with what eventually materialized. The Simpsons writing staff has historically included people with degrees from some of the most academically rigorous institutions in the country, many with backgrounds in mathematics, hard science, computer science, and political theory. These are not people generating random guesses about the future. They are educated, attentive observers of American culture who spend their working lives studying trends, analyzing patterns, and imagining what happens when those patterns reach their extremes. They are, in the most straightforward sense, very good at reading the present. And reading the present carefully enough is often indistinguishable, after enough time has passed, from reading the future. But here is where the purely statistical explanation starts to strain. Because some of the coincidences are not vague. Some of them are specific in ways that the dart-throwing framework does not comfortably account for. The Trump prediction did not merely suggest that a celebrity might run for president. It specified Trump by name and depicted him descending in a manner that visually echoes the famous escalator announcement he made in 2015. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not simply joke about exotic animal acts being inherently risky. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost precisely what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers during a live performance. These are not vague trend extrapolations that happen to touch something real. These are specific details that align with subsequent events in ways that make even skeptical people slow down. This is where a more interesting theory enters the conversation. Not the conspiracy theory version, with its implication of time travel or secret knowledge or some prophetic capacity embedded in the writing room, something more nuanced and, in its way, more impressive. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. This argument works through cultural influence rather than any kind of supernatural mechanism. The Simpsons is one of the most broadly watched, most frequently quoted, most thoroughly embedded pieces of American media in the history of the medium. It has been running longer than most of its audience has been alive. Its jokes have entered the language. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture, their own institutions, their own national character. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. It circulates. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point, a shorthand, a thing people say at parties and think about when they see Trump's name in the news. The joke does not predict the future. The joke makes the future feel familiar before it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination for an outcome that might otherwise have seemed shocking, and when the outcome materializes, the response is not disbelief but recognition. We have seen this already. The Simpsons already did this. The show's satire does not forecast the future. It normalizes the future. It takes trends that are already in motion and presents them as accomplished facts. And when those facts eventually materialize, the audience experiences the strange comfort of something that already feels known. The joke is not what made the thing happen. The joke is what made the thing feel inevitable. And there is the confirmation bias dimension, which the show's critics are correct to raise and which is crucial to any honest accounting of the prediction phenomenon. The Simpsons has also made thousands of jokes that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and political outcomes that went differently, and cultural shifts that never arrived. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds viral posts around the Simpsons predictions that failed. Confirmation bias operates in one direction. We remember and share and amplify the hits, and the misses dissolve into the general background of old television content that nobody is looking at anymore. When you filter nearly 800 episodes of satirical content through a mechanism that preserves only the accurate observations, you end up with a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The prophecy is a product of selection, not of foresight. The genuinely interesting conclusion is this: Springfield is not a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was. The nuclear power plant owned by a corrupt billionaire who is too wealthy to face consequences. The population too distracted and cognitively impaired to organize effectively against its own exploitation. The town that repeatedly resets rather than confronting the underlying structural problems. The government that shows up with a dome when the pollution gets bad enough but never addresses the source. The family that survives everything through sheer stubbornness and love but never quite escapes the system that is quietly damaging them. The Simpsons did not write this as a warning. It wrote it as a reflection. And America stared at that reflection for 36 years, and gradually, in ways that are uncomfortable to sit with, began to resemble what it saw. The show did not predict anything. The show wrote America down, and America eventually caught up. There is something worth sitting with in that conclusion, though, even after you have accepted its basic logic. Because the fact that a television show's satire can influence the cultural imagination to the point where its jokes shape how people perceive and respond to real events is itself a remarkable and somewhat unsettling phenomenon. The Simpsons joke about Trump's presidency did not make Trump president, but it may have made a Trump presidency feel like the kind of thing that happens in America, the kind of development that fits the established pattern of the country's political theater rather than something genuinely unprecedented. The joke was filed away in millions of people's memories, and when the event arrived, those people reached for the reference before they reached for alarm. There are subtler versions of this effect throughout the show's run. The Simpsons established, over years of depicting Springfield's relationship with its nuclear plant, a certain cultural shorthand for the way working-class communities relate to dangerous industrial infrastructure. With a combination of resignation and dark humor and a generalized awareness that the authority figure responsible is not particularly concerned with their welfare, but also with a comfort in the familiar that makes the dangerous seem manageable. This is not a neutral cultural contribution. The way audiences have come to think about nuclear power, about industrial accountability, about the relationship between working people and the billionaires who own the facilities that define their communities, has been shaped in part by 36 years of Springfield. The show does not simply reflect a pre-existing cultural attitude, it helps constitute one. The predictions that came true are interesting. The predictions that shaped how America thought about things that came true are the deeper story. And that deeper story is one the show itself is probably not fully aware of, because influence of that diffuse and ambient kind is not something any single creative work can track or control. It just accumulates over decades in the background of a culture, the way radiation accumulates in the background of Springfield. Perhaps that is the most accurate prediction the show ever made, not a specific event or technology or political development. The general condition of a country that has been living next to something dangerous and familiar for so long that it has stopped being able to see it clearly. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first, and America eventually caught up. Section 10. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the ones the system breaks. There are characters in Springfield who exist at the margins of the show's main narrative, but whose stories, examined carefully, tell you something essential about how the town actually operates. Two of them deserve more attention than they typically receive. The first is Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any meaningful length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He is the small, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists, as far as the show's narrative is concerned, primarily to suffer. He gets hit by cars with a frequency that should generate significant municipal liability. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive. He gets incinerated. He gets struck by lightning. He gets eaten by animals. He walks into traffic and disappears under wheels with such regularity that it has become the structural backbone of a running joke that has lasted 3 decades. He is, by any reasonable count, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. The show has killed Hans Moleman dozens of times, not in Halloween specials or dream sequences or explicitly non-canonical contexts. In regular episodes that count. Moleman dies and then he appears in the next episode completely unaffected, ready to be killed again in an endless cycle of destruction and reappearance that the show treats as scenery. Most fans accept this as a running gag and move on. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny, don't think about it. But the theories that we have been examining throughout this conversation each have their own explanation for Moleman, and each explanation is more interesting than the gag reading. The radiation theory proposes that Moleman represents an extreme case of the mutations that the power plant has been generating throughout Springfield's population. If radiation has given Homer near indestructible physical resilience, and if it has given Maggie cognitive capabilities that exceed what her body can contain, then Moleman might represent the most dramatic physical alteration the plant has produced, a biological reset mechanism, a body that can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. Not the way Homer endures damage and heals from it, which is a matter of unusual resistance and recovery speed. Something more fundamental. Moleman actually dies. His vital functions cease. And then, without explanation or ceremony, they resume. Death in Springfield, for Moleman specifically, is a temporary condition rather than a permanent state. If the coma theory is true, Moleman serves a different narrative function. He is a background process in Homer's dream, a recurring minor figure that Homer's unconscious mind generates and populates the town with, but does not maintain with the same consistency or care that it applies to the central characters. Molman dies because Homer's dreaming brain occasionally lets the minor simulation elements lapse. He comes back because the dream needs the town to feel populated, and Molman is one of the figures Homer's memory places in Springfield's background. He is not a person in this reading so much as a piece of set dressing that the dream assembles, breaks, and reassembles as needed. The collective denial framework from the principal and the pauper offers a third reading. Molman dies in public, repeatedly, in front of witnesses, and nobody investigates, nobody calls for inquiry. Nobody asks the obvious question about a man who keeps turning up dead and then not being dead. The town has normalized Molman's death cycle, the way it has normalized every other thing that should alarm them. He is one more piece of evidence that gets absorbed into the general background of a place that has agreed, at some level of collective understanding, not to ask too many questions about the things it sees. There is one more detail about Molman that deserves attention. He has stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at the character. His physical appearance suggests someone in their 80s at minimum. If he is being truthful, something happened to Hans Molman that aged him catastrophically, compressing what should have been decades of normal biological progression into a span that matches his subjective age but not his apparent condition. Something took a man in his early 30s and produced a body that looks like it has been through the better part of a century. The radiation theory has a straightforward answer for this. The coma theory has an answer. Even the collective denial framework has an answer, in the sense that Springfield would simply agree not to ask the question. The explanation that does not have an answer is the simplest one, the one that says, The Simpsons is a cartoon and none of this requires examination. Because cartoons, as we have been establishing throughout this conversation, are sometimes doing more than they appear to be doing. Now let's talk about Ned Flanders. Ned is, on the surface, the character the show has set up as Homer's foil in every possible way. He is kind where Homer is selfish. He is generous where Homer is acquisitive. He is devoutly faithful where Homer is casually indifferent to spirituality. He is physically fit where Homer is not. He is financially responsible where Homer is consistently in crisis. He is a good father and a good neighbor and, by any objective measure, a significantly better person than Homer in essentially every category that could be used to evaluate a person. And the show punishes him for it without mercy or reprieve. His wife, Maude, was killed at a NASCAR event when Homer's selfishness caused a cascade of events that culminated in a t-shirt cannon knocking her off the bleachers to her death. Homer's behavior directly caused the death of Ned's wife, and Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He absorbs punishment. He responds to it with grace. He turns the other cheek with a consistency that begins, the longer you watch, to look less like a spiritual virtue and more like a compulsion. The show eventually gives you the explanation for why. In the episode Hurricane Nettie, a storm destroys Ned's house. The community rebuilds it with incompetent enthusiasm, and the result collapses immediately. And Ned, who has been absorbing punishment with patient grace for 8 seasons at this point, finally breaks. He screams at the town. He names every wrong done to him. He says things he has been holding inside for years, decades, things that the relentless performance of goodness has required him to suppress. And then, he is institutionalized. In the facility, it is revealed that Ned's niceness is not natural. It is the product of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent and uncontrollable child, his parents being people who did not believe in conventional discipline and who consequently took him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist spent years conditioning the aggression out of him, reprogramming his behavioral responses through therapy intensive enough to produce lasting neurological change. Ned's patience, his kindness, his forgiveness, his inability to express anger even when anger is the only proportionate response to what is happening to him, none of it is character. All of it is programming. A psychological cage built around a feral child by a doctor who did the work so thoroughly that the cage became invisible even to the person inside it. Everything about Ned reads differently once you have this information. His patience with Homer is not saintly endurance. It is pathological incapacity. He cannot express anger in proportion to the provocation because his brain was rewired to prevent that expression at all costs. His faith is not the product of genuine spiritual conviction, but of a man who needs an external framework to explain why he keeps experiencing suffering, despite doing everything that the framework told him would lead to a different outcome. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the programmed response of a man whose conditioning leaves him no other option, because the conditioning was designed to ensure that the rage living inside him, the rage that was there from the beginning and was shaped rather than eliminated, never finds a way out. The show has shown us what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned breaks, even temporarily, what comes through is not violence but bottomless despair. A man who has spent his entire life performing goodness in the sincere belief that goodness would be rewarded, and who has finally been confronted with enough evidence that the performance is not working to break through the conditioning that has kept the performance running. Ned Flanders does everything right. He lives next door to a man who does almost everything wrong, and the gap between them has not closed in 36 years. Homer loses his mother to a billionaire's grudge, and continues working for that billionaire for decades without fully understanding why. Ned loses his wife to Homer's selfishness and forgives Homer because his conditioning will not let him do otherwise. Both of them are broken by the same system in different ways, and the system is not particularly interested in either of their healing. Here is the detail that turns Ned's situation from sad to something more theologically disturbing, given the show's own established cosmology. Within the canonical universe of The Simpsons, God is a real and active presence. He has spoken directly with Homer on multiple occasions. He has appeared in Homer's dreams. He has engaged with Homer's questions about faith and purpose with a patience and specificity that confirms, within the show's own logic, that God is genuinely present and accessible in Springfield. God has never spoken to Ned Flanders, the man who goes to church every Sunday, the man who has built his entire life around his faith, the man who has absorbed punishment after punishment with the quiet, desperate hope that his suffering is part of a plan that he does not yet have the perspective to understand. God has not spoken to Ned. God spoke to Homer, who fell asleep in church, who ate donuts during meltdown warnings, who has lived his entire adult life in comprehensive moral chaos, multiple times. The Simpsons is not telling you this accidentally. It is saying something precise about how the world in Springfield, which mirrors the world outside Springfield in the ways the show has always intended, actually distributes its blessings. The drunk in the back pew gets the divine audience. The devoted man in the front row gets silence. The compliance that Ned was conditioned into is not rewarded by the universe any more than it is rewarded by the town, or by the neighbor next door, or by the wife who died because of someone else's selfishness. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that does not reward rightness. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that does not punish wrongness. They have been living side by side for 36 years. The gap between them has never narrowed, because the system is not designed to close that gap. What the Ned Flanders story reveals, when you look at it alongside everything else the show has been documenting, is that Springfield does not reward virtue. This sounds like a cynical reading of what is, on the surface, a comedy about a nice man and his difficult neighbor, but the evidence for it is comprehensive and consistent. Ned follows the rules. Ned treats people with generosity and patience that go far beyond what anyone could reasonably expect. Ned prays. Ned gives. Ned forgives. And the return on this investment, across 36 years, is a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who will never appreciate him, and children who are growing up watching their father absorb punishment with a smile that costs him something every time he produces it. The contrast with Homer is the show's sharpest and most persistent structural joke. Homer does not follow the rules. Homer treats people with a casual, unreflective selfishness that produces genuine harm to everyone around him. Homer eats donuts during meltdown warnings. Homer's inattention caused Maude Flanders' death. Homer is, by the standards the show consistently applies to Ned, a worse person in almost every way that can be meaningfully measured. And Homer is fine. Homer has a family that loves him. Homer has a job that he cannot be fired from. Homer survives everything. Homer laughs and gets strangled and laughs again. Homer falls down and gets up and falls down again, and the cycle continues. And at the end of every episode, Homer is back on the couch with his family intact and the house on Evergreen Terrace still standing. The show is not arguing that virtue is punished and vice rewarded. It is arguing something more precise, that the system Springfield operates within is indifferent to both. The system does not punish Homer because Homer is useful to the system. The system does not reward Ned because Ned's virtue does not serve any of the system's operational requirements. What matters is function, not morality. Homer functions as the safety inspector who ensures the plant's violations continue. Ned functions as the neighbor whose relentless niceness provides a moral reference point that makes Homer's flaws legible by contrast, and whose continued presence on Evergreen Terrace means the community has at least one person modeling the behavior it nominally endorses without actually rewarding. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The drunk who fell asleep during the sermon gets the conversation. The devout man who has organized his entire life around his faith gets silence. Within the show's own cosmology, where God is real and accessible and has spoken to Homer on multiple verified occasions, this is not a theological abstraction. It is a specific, documented fact about how attention is distributed in Springfield's universe. The show knows what this means. It has always known. That is the quietly devastating heart of the Ned Flanders story. The system does not care about the qualities Ned has spent his life cultivating. The programming that made him good also made him incapable of the kind of anger that might, finally, produce change. And so he stays, on the other side of the fence, being good, getting nothing for it, waiting for something to make sense that the show has been quietly insisting, for 36 years, was never going to make sense. That is Springfield. That is the whole system. And Ned is the clearest evidence of what it costs to live inside it without going numb. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they were when the show began. In 1989, in a permanent present tense that looks like the world has stopped, but is actually the world running its familiar loops with metronomic consistency. Section 11. Where is Springfield, the town that belongs everywhere? Springfield is the most famous fictional American town in history. More people can name it than can name the capital of half the states in the actual country. It has a nuclear plant and a monorail and a tire fire and a harbor and a butte and a gorge and a prison and 2 hospitals and an elementary school that should realistically have been condemned on multiple occasions. It has mountains available when the episode needs mountains and ocean access available when the story calls for a harbor scene. It borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending on the episode. It sits on the coast and in the heartland and near the Canadian border and within a reasonable drive of Mexico. Its weather ranges from blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within the span of a single season without any character acknowledging this as unusual. Springfield does not exist in any specific American state. Springfield exists in all of them, simultaneously all the time. The show has spent 36 years carefully and deliberately contradicting itself about this. Every episode that appears to narrow Springfield's location is followed, eventually, by another that contradicts the established clue. The phone number's area code pointed toward Missouri in one episode. The state abbreviation was shown as NT, which is not a real state, in another. Homer once called the state capital, and the voice that answered identified the state as one that begins with a vowel, which narrows the field to 5 states but eliminates the rest. The show plants these details with the consistency of someone who knows they are building a puzzle and the generosity of someone who has quietly decided the puzzle has no solution. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed this directly in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, and chose that name because Springfield is one of the most commonly occurring city names in America, and because he grew up in the vicinity of the Oregon Springfield. This should have been the end of the mystery. Groening confessed. The answer was Oregon. Case closed. The show continued placing Springfield in geographic contexts inconsistent with Oregon within months of the interview. The writers did not honor the confession. They kept generating contradictions. The mystery was not solved by Groening's statement because the mystery was not meant to be solved. The confession was real and it was also irrelevant. What Groening was actually naming, when he named the show's setting after Springfield, Oregon, was not a specific geographic location. He was naming an idea, a type of place, the kind of American town that exists everywhere and nowhere at once. The surface explanation for Springfield's geographic impossibility is the one Groening and the show's producers have offered openly. Springfield is designed to feel familiar to every viewer regardless of their actual zip code. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. The show is meant to resonate with the broadest possible American audience, and the broadest possible setting is one that incorporates enough geographic features to feel like home to viewers from the coast and the interior, from the north and the south, from industrial cities and rural communities alike. Springfield's impossibility is the mechanism by which it achieves universality. This is true. The design intent is real and documented, but it is not the only thing going on. Under the radiation theory, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on a different quality. If the contamination from the plant has been sufficient to alter the biology of the town's residents in fundamental ways, if it has produced four-fingered, yellow-skinned people who do not age and can recover from fatal injuries, why should geography be exempt from the same distortions? If the matter inside the contamination zone operates by different rules than the matter outside it, why would the land itself follow normal geographic logic? Maybe Springfield has mountains and ocean because the radiation has not merely affected biology. Maybe it has warped the physical space around the town, compressing features that should be separated by hundreds of miles into a single impossible region. The way certain physics thought experiments describe mass sufficient to bend spacetime, bending the environment around it. Under the coma theory, Springfield's geography makes a different kind of sense. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise map of America available to it. It has impressions, fragments, every place Homer has ever visited or seen on television, or glimpsed from a car window or heard described. A vacation to somewhere with mountains, an ocean from a commercial that played in the hospital room while he lay unconscious. Farmland from driving through the Midwest, industrial infrastructure from his own working life. His brain assembled Springfield from every American landscape it ever encountered, layering them without regard for geographic logic, because dreams do not operate on geographic logic. Dreams operate on emotional logic. And emotionally, Springfield is everywhere Homer has ever been. It is the sum of all the places he carried with him into the dark. The principle and the pauper framework offers a third reading that might be the most practically significant of the three. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring regulatory action against a nuclear power plant if the state it is located in changes depending on which episode you are watching. You cannot hold anyone in Springfield accountable for anything if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined and the regulatory authority changes with the geography. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means a fixed regulatory environment, a consistent EPA oversight structure, a permanent state attorney general who can build a sustained case against a facility with 342 safety violations and human skeletons in the basement. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is not just a comedy device. It is a legal shield of remarkable effectiveness. A town with no fixed location has no fixed accountability structure, no consistent oversight, no regulatory environment stable enough for anyone to build an enforcement case within. The ambiguity is not accidental. It is, under this reading, the most important protection Burns's operation has. There was a moment when the mystery was nearly resolved from inside the show itself. In the mockumentary episode Behind the Laughter, Springfield's location was given as Northern Kentucky in the original broadcast. This should have been definitive, a direct statement within the show's own universe about its own geography. But in syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state entirely. The same episode, the same content, a different answer. The truth the show offered was different depending on which version of the show you were watching. Even when Springfield has an answer, that answer is not stable. It shifts. It mutates. It refuses to stay fixed in the way that any answer, any real answer, should stay fixed once it has been given. Springfield will not be located, not because the show is unable to commit, because the show committed, long ago, to not committing. Because a town that could be anywhere is a town that cannot be contained. A town that belongs to everyone is a town that nobody can shut down. A town with no fixed coordinates is a town you cannot find on a map when you show up with a warrant and a badge and questions about the three-eyed fish and the glowing billionaire and the cracked cooling towers leaking something invisible into the groundwater. Springfield is everywhere. Springfield is America. Springfield will not sit still long enough to be held responsible for what it has done. That is the whole point. Section 12. The floating timeline, why we won't let them go. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons first aired in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8. She is 8. Maggie was 1. She is 1. Homer and Marge were somewhere in their mid-30s. They still are. The world outside the yellow house on Evergreen Terrace has changed beyond any recognition that the people who were watching in 1989 could have predicted. The internet was born and transformed daily life so completely that it is genuinely difficult, now, to remember what ordinary existence felt like before it. Smartphones arrived and made the internet continuous and ambient, rather than something you went to a specific location to access. The entire architecture of how Americans work and communicate and entertain themselves was rebuilt multiple times over. Political landscapes shifted. Cultural norms shifted. The economy shifted. The country itself shifted in ways that felt seismic and in ways that felt gradual and in ways that felt, depending on who you were and where you were standing, like progress or like loss or like some complicated mixture of both. And Springfield remained still. The floating timeline is the television industry's term for the mechanism the show uses to accomplish this. The present is always the viewer's present. The cultural references update. The technology in the background updates. The news items that the characters respond to update. But the characters themselves do not accumulate years. They live in a permanent present tense, moving through decades of change without adding a single year to their ages. For a show in its first or second or even fifth season, this is simply how animated shows work, and nobody looks at it too closely. But The Simpsons has been running for 36 seasons. It has been running long enough that the floating timeline has produced contradictions so massive that they have started to become the show's most discussed feature rather than a background convention nobody particularly notices. Homer and Marge's origin story has been rewritten at least 4 times. Their high school years have been relocated across multiple decades, each flashback episode placing their formative experiences in a different era, each version contradicting the previous ones in ways the show neither acknowledges nor resolves. Their memories are not stable. Their history is not fixed. The past keeps being revised to accommodate a present that will not stop moving forward. Every theory we have examined across this conversation arrives at the floating timeline from a different direction and reaches the same conclusion through different reasoning. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of an unconscious man who went to sleep in April of 1993. Homer's dreaming brain cannot allow his children to grow older because it cannot imagine them growing older without him there to witness it. The last time he saw them clearly, Bart was 10 and Lisa was 8, and Maggie was small enough to hold. The dream holds them at those ages because those are the ages Homer's memory has them. The dream cannot generate their future selves because Homer has no reference material for those selves. He was not there. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the biological mutations produced by decades of exposure to the plant's output have altered the cellular aging processes of Springfield's entire population. Normal human aging is the result of cellular division and the accumulative damage that those divisions produce over time. If the contamination has altered how those cells divide and repair, it may have altered the timeline of that damage in ways that produce a population that simply does not age the way uncontaminated humans age. The principle and the Popper framework says nobody ages because Springfield's collective denial includes the denial of time's passage. The town chooses to maintain the status quo against any evidence that threatens it. Aging is a form of change. And Springfield has decided, at the level of social contract, that change is the one thing they cannot afford to allow. The Burns immortality theory notes that at least one person in Springfield has found a mechanism, through technology and wealth and the controlled application of radiation, to substantially extend their individual lifespan beyond normal biological limits. If the concept of aging is already negotiable in Springfield's universe, if the rules of biological time are already subject to modification through the right combination of resources and knowledge, then the question of why the entire town appears frozen in time becomes less a mystery and more a matter of identifying the mechanism. Every theory says the same thing in its own language. Time does not work in Springfield. Something about this town, whether it is the radiation or the dream or the collective choice or the billionaire's medical program or the town's essential function as a mirror held up to a specific moment in American culture, has broken the normal operation of time for everyone who lives within its limits. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this explicitly. In the Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the narrative flashes forward 20 years to show Lisa as a young woman, engaged, navigating the same complicated relationship with her family that she has been navigating at age 8, from a position of greater geographical distance but not necessarily greater emotional clarity. The episode is detailed and specific, and genuinely moving. Lisa has grown into the person the show has been quietly predicting she would become since her earliest episodes. Intelligent and principled, and searching for connection in environments that do not always know how to offer it. The episode proves that the show can imagine these characters in their futures. It can write those futures. It can render them with enough specificity and emotional truth to make a single episode feel like a complete portrait of a life. The writers know who these characters become if time is allowed to pass. They simply choose not to let it. Lisa returns to being 8 years old at the episode's end. Bart returns to being 10. The window that opened onto the future closes, and the permanent present resumes as if the glimpse never happened. This is the choice. Not a production limitation, not a creative failure, not the inability to imagine growth. A deliberate, sustained 36-year choice to hold these characters in place. And this is where the floating timeline stops being a show-specific mystery and becomes something larger, because The Simpsons is not simply a television show. It has been the American family's mirror for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie are not just characters. They are the family that American culture has been looking at every Sunday night for 36 years and saying, yes, that is us. That is the shape of the thing we are. The messy and chaotic and frustrated and loving and sometimes terrible and always somehow surviving version of the American household. And that family, the mirror family, is not allowed to change. Homer must always be in the middle of his life. Marge must always be patient. Bart must always be rebellious. Lisa must always be brilliant and isolated. Maggie must always be small enough to carry. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment these characters age, the moment the timeline stops floating and starts landing, the story that the show is telling becomes something different from what it has always been. It becomes an elegy. The story of a family that ran out of time. And America does not want that story. America wants the version where the couch gag plays and the family piles in from the right, and Homer is almost flattened by the garage door, and Marge parks the car, and everything is intact, and the house on Evergreen Terrace is right where it has always been, and nobody has grown up, and nobody has left, and the beer is cold, and the donuts are in the kitchen, and it is Sunday night, and there is nowhere you need to be. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement. The Simpson family is frozen in time because we need them to be, because they represent something that we are not willing to let conclude. The chaotic, dysfunctional, indestructible, genuinely loving American family. The family that survives everything and resets after every disaster and starts fresh every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. The family that will not age because aging means ending. And the American family in our cultural imagination is not allowed to end. In the Coma Theories reading, Homer keeps the dream running because stopping it means confronting how much time has passed and what is left of his life on the other side of the hospital bed. In the broader cultural reading, we keep the show running because stopping it means confronting how much time has passed and what is left of our own lives. Since the couch we sat on watching the opening credits in 1989 or 1994 or 2003, the children in the room when this show began are adults now. Some of them have children of their own. The world they were watching in as Bart made his chalkboard confession is as remote from the current moment as the 1950s were from 1989. It is, objectively, gone. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day of failing to properly maintain a nuclear facility, none of that has to be fully confronted. We can sit down, we can turn on the television, we can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to a town that does not appear on any map, to a family that has not aged in 36 years, to the yellow house with the green lawn and the dog in the backyard and the baby on the kitchen floor. The loop is not the Simpson family's prison. It is ours. We built it, we maintain it. We tune in every week, or we stream it on quiet nights when the house has gone still. And there is something comforting about the familiar yellow faces and the couch gag and the particular quality of the Springfield light that the animators have been rendering. With remarkable consistency since 1989, we watch because the show gives us something we did not know we needed until it existed. A family that will not change, a home that will always be there. A town that is everywhere and nowhere and somehow against all probability, still standing. Every theory we have explored in this conversation, the radiation and the coma and the shooting, and the immortal billionaire and the silent prodigy and the conspiracy that broke 3 generations of one family, and the denial that the town votes into law, and the predictions that turned out to be mirrors, and the geographic impossibility that is also a legal shield, and the oldest man in Springfield, who is kept alive because Springfield cannot function without him. All of it converges here. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental. Something that goes deeper than animation style or cartoon logic or episodic storytelling conventions. The show has been documenting that wrongness, carefully and consistently, since its very first season, not through dramatic revelation but through accumulation. Through the patient layering of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes undeniable to anyone who is willing to look at it directly. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you every single week. It is just that nobody in Springfield can see them, because Springfield has made sure they cannot. And nobody in the audience has fully seen them, because we have been watching for so long that we have become Springfield. We have accepted the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the ageless children and the immortal billionaire and the town that will not change and the family that will not grow up. We have normalized it all. We look at a 3-eyed fish in a cartoon river and we say, that is just how things are around here, without pausing to consider that how things are around here should alarm us. But that is what tonight has been, a few hours of pausing to consider it. The version of Springfield that lives underneath the jokes and the couch gags is strange and sad, and in a way that is hard to articulate but easy to feel once you have spent time with it, more beautiful than the surface version. Not because darkness is beautiful, but because the things it is dark about are real things. Homer's stupidity is a scar left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to resist it. Maggie's silence is the most intelligent strategic choice anyone in the Simpson household has ever made. Burns's immortality is the logical conclusion of wealth applied to the problem of death with infinite resources and no moral constraints. Marge's patience is the structural element that holds the whole fragile construction standing. Bart's rebellion is the only sane response available to a 10-year-old who will always be 10 years old in a town that has decided change is too dangerous to permit. And Lisa, 8 years old, brilliant. Alone in the way that people who see clearly are always alone in environments that would prefer not to be seen. Asking questions that nobody wants to answer. Playing her saxophone in her room, working through something, always working through something. The only person in Springfield who has not stopped looking. The biggest mystery is still the simplest one. After 36 seasons, after nearly 800 episodes, after every theory and every buried storyline and every accumulated piece of evidence, we have spent this time examining, why can't we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town, the town we grew up in and the town we never quite left. Maybe because Homer is our father and Marge is our mother, and Bart is who we wanted to be when we were young enough to want things with that uncomplicated intensity. And Lisa is who we meant to become. And Maggie is the version of ourselves we have been keeping quiet behind a careful public face, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the moment when it will finally be safe to speak. Maybe it is simpler than that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older than we expected to be by now, that the world has changed in ways we did not all consent to, that the couch we sat on as children, watching the opening credits roll for the first time, is in someone else's house now, or gone, or we have not thought about it in years, and the fact that we are thinking about it now feels like something arriving from a great distance. As long as The Simpsons is on, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down, we can turn on the television. We can go to Evergreen Terrace, where the kids are always young, and Marge still believes in Homer despite everything, and the tire fire is burning, and the plant is leaking, and the billionaire is alive, and the timeline is floating, and the family is intact. We can go home. Springfield will be there in the morning. It always is. That is the whole mystery, and the whole answer, and the whole point. Sleep well.